Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Booker, literary aviatrix, and I'm so thrilled to talk to the author of the Aviatrix Book Club discussion book for August 2023, The Elimination Game.
Reason to stay on ground. Lift your hands and you can catch and fly.
Connie Reeves, welcome.
Hi, Liz. How are you doing? This is a great thing that you have been doing,
Oh,
and
thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
you can only imagine how much work it all is on your part, to read all the books and contact the people, set up the appointments and think about what to talk about, and then, the editing and publishing and the discussions and all that,
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sure you didn't think it was going to be this when you first started it.
It has certainly grown into some things, and we will talk about that because you and I have both worked on projects that kind of grow bigger than we expect them to, but are good deeds in the world. And I know if it was the same for you, and I'm sure it was, we'll get to that later, but I get more out of this than I have to put into it. So I do appreciate you acknowledging that, though.
I'm just so glad that, there are people like you out there, and Becky Condon, who's always writing those reviews as well.
Becky, our number one book club member. Go, Becky.
Yes, she definitely really writes, great reviews. So,
She really
and it's
does.
definitely helpful,
Yep.
And I think one of the great things for all of us is that there are now a ton of books out there.
Over 600.
Yeah. And so, it's almost like, there was a period in time where I could have every book that was available.
Right.
Now, I have to pick and choose, because otherwise I'd be buying like 10 a month,
I know. I know. That's a beautiful thing. And there's room for many, many more.
Yes.
And since we're talking about people who are making these contributions, I just want to give a shout out also to Jackie Boyd, who has been reviewing books for a very long time for the 99s magazine too. And I'm trying to get together with her to collaborate on something as well.
Well, I'll tell you, my husband just read the biography of Amelia Earhart. And so he said she helped found, or I think founded in the 99s. And he says, aren't you a member of that? I said, actually, no, because back when I first started flying, it just didn't seem like something that was for me. And of course, we didn't have the internet then or anything like that. Everything had to be done by mail. So, you had to have heard of it by word of mouth somehow, or in a magazine. And so it's just one of those things that I kind of thought was more of an exclusive club that, not everyone could join. So anyway. But
since we're talking about that, I want to let's go there and just talk about that for a second, because I'll be honest with you. I felt the same way when I was on active duty, because I went to a couple of 99s meetings, and most of the women that I met there were civilians who owned their own aircraft and had the flexibility and luxury to go do fly-ins and stuff like that.
Right.
And of course, I didn't have that. And I was like, well, where do it's cool that you guys are all pilots, but where do I fit into this as a retired pilot who is exploring general aviation? I am far more I feel more welcome and fit in better, but I know they have lots of military members, they're doing great work, and they have lots of scholarships.
Yes, and I think that I also had just thought that if we weren't doing the Air Race Classic, then it's like, what was the point, so, and obviously doing that. So anyway.
Yeah, just our silly misperceptions being isolated in the military like we were. I was the same way.
Exactly.
Which we're going to talk about. So let's get into this. Give us, if you would, a synopsis of The Elimination Game, which was an awesome thriller novel. And then if you want to do a reading, we welcome that too.
All right. Well, first, thank you for that compliment. And secondly, is it okay if I just show it, The Elimination Game? And even finding this helicopter in a stock photo, was extremely difficult.
I bet.
Who's around to see a helicopter going down with the smoke and take a photo, especially during the Cold War era?
Yeah.
So, okay, The Elimination Game in a nutshell. It's about a small group of male Army aviators who do not like that women have come into their purview of flying Army aviation. And so it takes place during the Cold War, just very shortly after women began graduating from Fort Rucker, the Army Flight School, as helicopter pilots and going out to units. And just like you had mentioned earlier, being isolated, it's usually just one woman per unit, one woman per flight school class, et cetera. And so a lot of people do ask me, was this based on my experience? No, there were no men out there trying to kill us. But there were quite a few who didn't appreciate us being there. Now, there were many more who did, but they weren't the ones who came up and said, "Oh, so glad women have joined Army Aviation." No, what we heard were things like, "Why do you want to be here? Why do you want to be an aviator? Why do you want to why do you want to fly helicopters? What are you going to do when the balloon goes up? Because you can't go in combat. So are we going to leave you here behind, as the platoon leader of helicopters, as the company commander?" And so we got a lot of that at flight school. We went to the officers club. Diana Davis and I were in flight school together. And that was a complete bonus because it was two of us in the one class. Yeah. And do you know Diana?
I don't. No, tell us about her.
Oh, Diana is just about the most enthusiastic person you will ever meet. Okay. Whenever she sees someone that she cares about, I'll just kind of mimic it. She'll say, "Connie, how are you? How you doing?"
That's awesome.
So it was through her that I met, many other people at flight school, because I wasn't, I really had no thought process that we women at the time were in any way unique. We were just there. We applied, right, and we're there. And I had even asked my first flight instructor, I did ask this. I said, "Have you taught women before? And how many women have been through here?" And he says, "We have no idea how many women have been here." And that was the Army's attitude for a long time, was they really had no idea. Diana was the one who actually went to Fort Rucker and somehow got records and made a list of like the first 200 women that had gone through flight school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So it wasn't inspired by real events. I did read it as a bit of hyperbole, like really exaggerating sort of the negative feedback that we got.
Yes.
But it was honestly like plausible, especially the way you set things up. It was plausible. There were some really hostile guys in the service. Yeah. So, yeah.
Right. Yes. And so, especially during those days, you just wanted to be, I can't necessarily say equal, because in the Army, most of the pilots are warrant officers. And so you're a commissioned, I was a commissioned officer. So they're not your equal. You're the company commander or the XO or the platoon leader or the operations officer. And they're what we called in the Army, Peter pilots. That was their job, was just to fly. And so we were never as good as they were, the warrant officers.
Right.
And our main job was always something else. We became aviators so that we knew aviation and, knew the capabilities of adding helicopters to the war zone. So
yeah, the bigger picture. Yeah. And so I don't know if you stated it as clearly as maybe would be helpful for people who haven't read the book, but like this is a book about a period of time in which there were men in the service who did not want women there, and they were staging their deaths. So they were, it was an organized effort to kill women through what appeared to be aircraft accidents.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And so, the first accident is definitely totally believable. And then it takes a while for the Army, the bureaucracy, to catch on that maybe, this isn't just a one-off thing. And I'll tell you something else that I think entered into my process about this book is Kara Hultgreen, when she died, off the aircraft carrier.
Right.
I was working in the Pentagon at the time. I was a lieutenant colonel. And the men that I worked with, a few of them, we were in a morning briefing with our boss, and they all started laughing about her.
Oh.
And they had
Wow.
heard, this was in the news, there were insinuations that her training records would prove that, she hadn't been up to snuff.
I heard about this. Yeah.
And that was, oh my gosh, it was so infuriating. And so
Right.
that's one reason I think why, I kind of stress them going back into their flight records here at Fort Rucker and seeing what's in there. And
Yep.
because the Navy did prove that about Kara, that she did not, she was just as good as other pilots. I mean,
Right.
if let's say if you're not number one, it doesn't matter. As long
Right.
as you graduate and you get your wings, you're a pilot.
Theoretically, but as you know, and talking to many other women of that era, there was like the strategy to succeed was they had to be the best because they had to work twice as hard. And then, us second and third waivers come by and be like, well, he can be average. Why can't I? I was very average. So
And yes, that was, I mean, even back then, I knew that there could be the barb thrown at you that, you
right.
slept your way.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
I was, I wasn't the distinguished graduate, but I was an honor graduate. And so I worked hard to do that. I met in the top 5, I think it was. And,
You go, girl.
thanks. And I had a battle with some guy, because we each thought that, we might get that spot. And it wasn't until like the last check ride, that we knew. And I was actually better at all the written tests than most of the guys,
The point that you made about Kara really, again, so like when I say that this story is plausible, when you look back across the history of women in aviation and you look at what was going on in the early air races, that there was definitely strong suspicion and evidence of sabotage that would kill women if, and a couple of times did. And then again, with the WASP, I mean, there were some times when there were questions about what was going on with them. So yes, it's an extreme idea, but why did you want to tell the story?
Why did I want to tell the story? Well, I mean, this is really pretty simple. I had published Hawthorne's Cottage, a novel that is pretty much like a Maeve Binchy book or a beach read. I'll show it to you if you haven't seen it. And so this is Hawthorne's Cottage. You can see the flowery, romantic look of it. Okay.
Yeah.
It's set in England, and I wrote it as if I were a British author, with colloquialisms and vocabulary and spellings and stuff like that. At that time, I had read something by Benjamin Disraeli, who said, if you want to read a good book, write one. And so that's what I did with this book. This book just came flowing out. Okay. And then probably my biggest concern after doing that was, could I write a second? Could I write another novel? Because, if you're still trying to go to publishers and agents and stuff, then they want to know that you're not a one book writer and you had to have a second book in your stable. And so that was the primary reason why I wanted to write this. And then I think I recognized that, I had some unique perspective, having been an Army aviator flying helicopters. And I partially wondered to myself, after so many years, could I remember enough, and narrate enough, especially technically, that was my biggest concern, was, getting technical things wrong. And so, yes, I did do a lot of research. I looked up a lot of things. I pulled out old manuals and stuff like that, went up into my attic, pulled them down, and, of course, refreshed myself about aerodynamics with helicopters and all kinds of things. And I have a fantastic friend named Brad Lupine, who was a CW5, and we were in German language school together and became very good friends. Why he was a W4 then? Why would a W4 aviator be learning German? But anyway, different story. And so he was really my technical advisor on this book, because I wanted him. He he had been, all kinds of instructors at Fort Rucker, and he applied to go back on active duty when the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan began, and he was he was one of those safety pilots that would fly there and inspect accidents, accident investigator and stuff like that. So he went through here, and that was really helpful. So I just thought that there were a number of issues that perhaps I could try and tie together, like, what it was like for women during that period, when we came in, and it's a Cold War era that, is now history for a lot of people. I mean, even when I wrote this, I published it in like 2011, I think. So even then, it was the Cold War. For young people today, what's that? What was the Cold War? Where we're stationed in Germany, just waiting for the Warsaw Pact to come across the Fulda Gap. And so it never happened, but we were constantly, on edge, on practicing and all that. So, and then I also like the idea of the different locations, because military people move all around, and you may be at one assignment and then you move somewhere else, and you're there with someone else who came from a third place. So I knew, I had traveled a lot and lived a lot overseas. And so I thought that would be interesting to bring in, these different places.
Let's back that up and tell us what brought you to Army Aviation, and then a little bit about your career.
Well, there are a couple of things that got me into it, and I can mention all of them. I mean, I say really there's a few, but the primary thing that got me into it is that I was in a course at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. I was a second lieutenant, and we were in a tactical imagery analysis course. And the guy who sat behind me, his name was Joe Cuellar, he said he was applying to flight school. And I thought, you can do that. If he can do that, I can do that. And so sadly for him, he had diabetes and he didn't get to go. Oh. But I did. I did not have any great, and Diana Davis and I both, talked about this, that we're both pretty much this same way, that neither of us had this burning desire to be an Army aviator. Just, we applied, it was there, got in. And so, I had a roommate before I got married named Chris Montan. She was in the Navy. She was a Navy Lieutenant JG, and she had a private pilot's license like I had at the time. I had gotten that in Arizona also. Okay. And she wanted to be a pilot in the Navy so badly, but she couldn't. She wore glasses. And then it turns out that the Navy, started allowing women on ships, and she didn't want to do that. So she got out. But there were some other factors. My father got a private pilot's license back in 1968 or so, and flew us around, and did it, it was mostly just sightseeing kind of stuff. And so that was probably my first introduction to someone doing that as a private citizen.
So then you went to flight school eventually, and then the rest of your career, kind of, how did that look? What did you fly? And I know that you got into some other stuff later on. So
yes. So I got to flight school, and we were to fly the UH-1 Huey helicopter, which is the one that was, primarily used in Vietnam. And it was extremely well organized, because they had like a month doing this and another month doing that and a couple months doing this. And I just really loved the whole flight school setup, because you'd have academics in the morning and fly in the afternoon, or you'd have flying in the morning, academics in the afternoon, or when you did night flying, then you, I think the way that usually was we had the academics in the morning, went home and slept, and then did the night flying, went back and slept, whatever. So for me, I know this perhaps sounds odd, but you might be the same. I have never been mechanically inclined. And so climb on top of a helicopter and, inspect the rotors and all that stuff. Okay, I could do that. But the things that I thought were like, the first time we had to go in and look at the engine, an engine's on display. Yeah. I think it was the T-53 or something like that, and learn all the parts. I go,
I was okay with that. I think I had a fascination. I grew up hunting, and I mean, I was driving a Jeep Willys when I was 11 years old on my grandfather's deer lease. So I think I was comfortable with that. I do have my limitation is always memorizing numbers, because that's excruciating for me. So,
yeah. So, how tall are you?
I'm 5'4".
Oh, see, that's me too.
Short, can't reach anything. Yeah.
Before I got to flight school, I had no idea, first of all, that, there hadn't been many women that went through. I just didn't know it was even a thing. Okay.
Yeah. Same for me.
Yes. And I didn't know that I was right at the cutoff for height. I didn't know about that either. So I just squeaked by there. But that also caused a number of issues, when flying, because, those armored seats in helicopters, they're so heavy to move forward because, it's like at a teeny slant when it's down on the ground. Yeah. And so I'm trying to shove this armored seat up so my feet can reach the pedals easily, and you have some guy sitting over here, whether it's an instructor or a PIC or whatever. And it's like, you're taking so long to get
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And then, having to relieve oneself. Easy for the men, we put down somewhere in a field, and they just hop out of the tree line, and and basically it was just so much trouble that and hydration wasn't a big thing back then either. Okay, we didn't have bottles of water, we didn't take food on the helicopter or drinks or any of that. So I'm sure that I was mostly dehydrated, but wasn't even a concern back in those days. My concern was, let's not have to go to the bathroom, because then it would take longer for me, to get out, go do it, get redressed.
I know. The last thing you want to be is like slow or a burden, or like be, like interrupting the mission because you need to go relieve yourself. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yep. And, and because they would be, they'd be a little impatient, most of them, like, why is it taking you? I mean, they wouldn't say this, like, why is it taking you so long? But it did take a while. At that time, flight school was incredibly hard. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my life, and I'd always been a high achiever, but that was grades basically in school. Right. I wasn't athletic. I didn't join clubs and stuff like that. The only thing I ever did, like say as a teenager, was just go out and run, for like weight maintenance. Really, it wasn't, for any competition. So my husband and I got married before I went to flight school.
So how did that affect your career? Like, what happened after flight school? Where did you go? And
both my husband and I were sent to Germany, and we were near Frankfurt. He was further outside of Frankfurt. He was the only intelligence officer in a cavalry squadron, and this is cavalry with tanks, not attack helicopters. Yeah. And I was in Fliegerhorst, Hanau, near Frankfurt, with 173rd Aviation Company / Air Assault. We had mine pods that would go on the helicopters, and then M60 machine guns. And at first I was the XO, and I was really good in that kind of job because I'm very organized. And, I think probably the greatest thing that I did there was just make sure that every soldier got the awards they were due and the evaluation reports that they deserved, because that required a lot of nagging, to first sergeants, platoon sergeants, anyone who supervised anyone else. So anyway, then my husband got offered a job as a company commander in Frankfurt, And I was pregnant at that time with our son. We moved to Frankfurt, and a few weeks later, our son was born. And the Army gave us 6 weeks maternity leave at that point.
Yep.
And as soon as I went back, then, I knew that they could give me a PT test and a weigh-in the very day I came back. I mean, it was terrifying. And
were you able to fly while you were pregnant?
No. That is a story that can still bring my ire to this day. Because first I was excited about thinking I was pregnant. So I went to a regular doctor. And if you went to a regular doctor, then you had to report that visit to the flight surgeon. And the battalion had a flight surgeon attached, and he also ran the clinic at Fliegerhorst. So I had to go see him. And then his responsibility was he had to recommend suspension from aviation duty to the commander. And the battalion commander had no choice at that time but to accept that. And then it went to Fort Rucker, and then it went to the Department of the Army. And the medical rules at the time actually included pregnancy. That if you pregnancy was quote, disabling condition, and that if the condition resolved, pregnancy always resolves one way or another. Okay, doesn't go on forever. Then I could apply again to be reinstated on flight status, because they actually took my aviation MOS away.
Oh,
Department of the Army did that. And they said, if and when I could pass a flight physical and return to aviation duty, depending upon the needs of the Army, then I could maybe be a pilot again. And so, yes. And so that's how it went the first time. It so happened when the battalion commander named Colonel Don Fuller arrived, I was already pregnant. He was a fantastic battalion commander. He was very laid back. He was not at all a micromanager. He let his officers and leaders do what they needed to do. When I got pregnant the second time, he was still the battalion commander, and he knew what had happened, with me being pregnant previously. And I had an IUD in place after my son was born so that I wouldn't get pregnant. Because here's another thing. The Army would not let us be on birth control pills either.
Excuse me?
Right. Yes. Could not be on birth control pills. That was part of the deal about being in Army aviation. Yes.
I mean, that's a new one for me. I knew a lot of this stuff. I have my own story about influencing the policies in the U.S. Coast Guard, some of which were based on 1980s-ish Army studies, which were absurd. But I did not know that they prohibited you taking birth control. That's insane.
So when you're married, and newly married, like we were, and we at one point we finally just said, throw caution to the wind, and we'll see if we get pregnant, and it didn't take long. It took a few weeks or a month, and okay, so my battalion commander, Colonel Fuller, knew this background, and even at that point, I took the IUD because it was like 97% effective, okay, at the time. And, but it quit working.
Yeah, I have those stories too. Interesting.
Is that right? So
yeah, I have birth controls that didn't work. I got pregnant a few times unplanned. So yeah.
So, and then I felt guilty because I had been asked, I guess I don't remember. Our assignment was 3 years in Germany, and I was asked before the third year was up, would I extend another year and become the company commander of our HHC company? And I said, huh, well, okay, I'll do that. That's what every captain wanted to be in the Army, was a commander, company commander of some sort. So when I found out then that the IUD didn't work and I was pregnant, I went to see my boss, Colonel Fuller, first. So I went to Colonel Fuller and I said, I have a problem here. And I told him, and this guy, he just leans back and he says, we all have health problems. He says, I have back problems. And that's how he took it. And he then says, you know what? I think your paperwork here is just lost. We've lost it somehow, we don't have anything to send to Fort Rucker. We're just, you're still you're still a pilot or whatever, but we agreed basically that, I would not fly. Okay. I was really sick with my daughter, and with her, I didn't want to fly. With my son, I could have flown up until the cyclic, hit my stomach or whatever. Yeah. And Colonel Fuller always said that he loved watching me in meetings because he says you would turn green and run to the bathroom.
Yeah.
So anyway,
it sounds like you had, I'm very surprisingly, to be honest, and wonderfully that you had some really great support there.
Yes.
I had a variety of experiences because I got pregnant a few times. Like I said, I have 3 children, each of whom I had a decade apart. But I found myself being the one to educate my command every time when I was pregnant to help them understand what the rules were, to have to decipher that stupid little comment about, the vibrations of an aircraft might affect fetal hearing based on a study of chicken embryos done in the 1980s. I'm like, really? So, yeah. And so commanders are having to make decisions about, because our policy was that we could fly up until the last trimester if the trifecta, the flight surgeon, the commanding officer, and the member all agreed. So it was just an effort of like convincing everybody that I was good.
And that's the way the Army was with a lot of things, especially with the combat exclusion law. It wasn't a law for the Army. It was, as you know, it was just the Navy and the Air Force. And the Army just followed suit. That's all.
That was such a great conversation because I just feel like the history of I think, first of all, this is going to lead us right to, and it just makes sense right now to talk about the other book that you worked on, Military Fly Moms. So these conversations about our experiences dealing, family planning, how we manage those things, those were of interest to me because I had my first child before I was a pilot. So I had a child when I graduated from flight school who pinned my wings on. But I wanted another one in my first operational tour, and I was not sure how to plan that. I wanted to make sure that I was fully qualified in the aircraft. But then, of course, now all of a sudden I'm qualified as an aircraft commander, but I'm going to go off the schedule for a period of time for sure. And so now I'm kind of screwing my buddies, right? Well, I was very fortunate. I had a peer group at that unit who were very supportive. But whenever I went to, and I went to my leadership and I was like, I want advice on my family planning. And every guy that I talked to, they were all senior, said, you need to call this one woman who is an 05. And I was an 03, 04. I was not going to cold call an 05 and ask her, who I did not know, and ask her for family planning. So then if you fast forward, after I had that first child, I was like, this is stupid. I got assigned to Air Station Miami, and there were a lot more women there, and the younger women were coming to me for advice. And so I was like, this is so stupid. I'm not the first person to do this. So I reached out to every woman that I could find, either on active duty or retired or separated, who had been in the Coast Guard, who had had a child. And I asked them to just write their story. You know, how did they plan it? How did they let their command know? Did they fly? Didn't they fly? What were their contingencies after they had their children? All of this stuff, all the stuff that you worry about, right? And how do you plan your career? So I got that done, and this is going to lead up to this book that you guys did. I got that first version of that. I had 11 contributors to this, what we called the mom book, and I put it all together in like 2006 and 2005, 2006. And then fast forward to 2010, I'm now the aviation detailer, and I'm doing an update to this book. And now we have like 25 women who are contributing to it, because that many more women had kids during that time. And that book was intended to both give, you know, the women coming behind us a playbook, like here are the many varieties of ways that women have handled this in their careers, but also to kind of open our doors to them, to invite them to communicate, to contact us, you know, because we didn't have the social media and stuff where you could have instant access to people. Well, at that very same time was when Linda Maloney was working on this book, Military Fly Moms, which you were involved in, and she invited me to be a part of it. So I'm in this book. Tell us about the book.
Well, I had gotten to know Linda, first of all, just because she lived in St. Mary's County, where Pax River is, and was part of WMA. And she said, I saw that, like her notice in the WMA newsletter about, you know, if you're a woman in the military, aviation, and a mom, you know, contact me. I'm going to do this. And she said something like, you know, from the present to 25 years ago. And I said, 25 years ago? Well, that's not actually long enough, because I had done it before that, or whatever. So we became friends, and we would meet for lunch occasionally. And then she's telling me, you know, she's just updating me periodically, as friends will do, about her project, this book, you know, and her boys and stuff like that. And in the beginning, she thought it was going to take 1 year. And I said, that is really ambitious. I hope you can do it, but I don't know if you can. And so then she was trying various things. And one thing ticked in my mind one day. We were having lunch, and I can even envision us right now. It was at Panera across the bridge. And she said there was this one publishing company that had agreed to take her manuscript and something. And I get, wait, but do you have to pay to have this published? And she said, yes. I said, don't do that. I said, we both said it at the same time. I said, I want to publish your book. And she said, I wonder if you would publish my book. So that's actually how that came about, because I thought it was going to be I still believe it is. I thought it was going to be an amazing, amazing book. And we both really did believe that some mainstream publisher might pick it up, because it is so unique. And but I guess the niche just isn't big enough, you know. Nope. But at any rate, it's a beautiful book. And she worked so hard, as you know, in getting, you know, the bios and the photos and the quotes and, you know, the sayings and all of that. And I just thought, I cannot let her, you know, give this to some publisher that, first of all, is going to make her pay for it. What do they call those? Vanity press thing.
Right.
And because I said, I believe that I could do it. And I said, it just depends on how she was envisioning it, what her vision was for the book. And so, you know, coffee table book, a lot of photos, some different colors in there. And so we started working on it in 2011, summer of 2011. And then published in 2012. I mean, it seemed at the time a very long time, because, you know, we were on the phone, texting, email many times a day for probably 8 months or so. You know?
Wow.
Yeah. And she is such an amazing person. She's the one person I would like to see write her memoir. Yeah. because she ejected from an aircraft. And I think
Wow.
that is the story that makes her completely unique. I mean, there are a lot of other things, but
Yeah.
she's pretty humble, I think. And she just doesn't see that as extraordinary as I do, I think, but anyway, not a whole lot of people get to do that. And she was the first woman in this particular kind of ejection seat.
Well, all I know is that when this project came up, it was such serendipity from my perspective about what I was doing within my own service. And the book just came out beautifully. I was honored to be a part of it, especially knowing now, like at the time, I wasn't connected to all these women. But, since I've retired, since I got more involved in WAI and WMA, the Women Military Aviators, I've gotten to know more about some of the women that are in there. And I feel very honored to be included in that group because.
Yes, I totally agree. And I feel the same way because I'm in there too. And,
well, you were a pioneer, so
I didn't put myself in there. She put me in there, but I know that if I had kind of joined on board with her earlier, instead of just, listening as a friend, then I might have suggested other Army women, because I think there's only 4 Army in the book.
Yeah.
It's heavy Navy, Air Force. And so Coast Guard and Marine Corps, none of those quite, have a lot of people in there either. So that would have been good. And then, there are other people myself that I knew of that I still don't even know why they weren't in there. But, it was what she started, and it was too late for me to suggest any other people. And then she has come back to me a couple of times and asked if I wanted to do an update. And I've said, no, I can't.
I think what would be neat now is to just do it like a digital, like a website with you could have a website with everybody's stuff on it, and it could be a living document then,
That's true.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just an idea. I'm not going to take that on. I'm not trying to throw good idea fairies out there for projects that I'm not going to do right now.
Right. I know. And see, I'm now 68. And so people, well, you asked, do I have any other writing project going on? As you have probably gathered on Facebook, I'm pretty involved in knitting right now. I love telling people, because I know what my image was of people who knitted previously.
Oh, I've been knitting my whole adult life since I was a child. Oh yeah, I'm a knitter, and one of my best, my air mama, who is a helicopter pilot who I was stationed with in San Francisco, who now is retired in Australia. She's also a knitter. Like, we're not. Yeah,
I know. It's a thing you don't generally know about people until you start talking to them. You can see. I don't know if you can see. This is. I did jewelry.
I might be able to. Like, our screen is weird when it's like this, but yeah. Ooh, pretty. Yeah. See, I would go crazy in there. I love yarn.
I do too. So, but I love telling people when they say, like, what do you do now that you're retired? I say, I knit, and I have 4 cats, and I have 2 granddaughters. And I know that sounds like the typical old lady thing. I say, but I used to be a helicopter pilot. And they go, whoa. Right. Yeah. Because that's, for you'd be the same thing. It's just, it's a juxtaposition that most people don't think is right. Anyway, so this is actually the thing I am working on.
Ooh, can you read it for me? That's beautiful. It's a so for people who are just listening, it looks like a cartoon image of a badass woman in front of a baby stroller, some guys in the background, and a helicopter and some other stuff. What is this?
Okay, well, first of all, this is my autobiography.
Oh, fun!
But it's only half. And as a mother, you will appreciate this. I only got it up to my son being born. I haven't put my daughter in here. She says she doesn't care, but that's my goal.
Where'd you get that cover picture?
That is actually a great story. My husband, when he became a company commander, he had a lieutenant named Mike Conrad who worked for him. And this Mike Conrad made these caricatures.
It's fabulous.
So this was the very first one that he did, I think, that my husband commissioned him to do this of me. And then I had one. Yeah. So yeah, you saw the baby carriage and the helicopter. That's actually the number on there of the helicopter that I flew in our formation flyby at the graduation of flight school. And so
that's so cool.
And then, we got ski lift tickets, and we had bought a Cessna. Let's see. So there's a little airplane. And my husband is down here, I think. Let's see. Where is he? Oh yeah, this is supposed to be my husband right here, peering at whatever.
That is so cool. Okay, so where is this memoir in its evolution right now? Because have you already published this?
No, what I did was I went on Amazon's arm, a publishing arm called Kindle Direct Publishing, and I just did a print preview copy, so that because I find I actually can do editing and proofing. I like to do it on the written page, because if I keep doing it on the computer, then I miss stuff. So
you got to mix it up. Yeah,
process. And this is only the first half of my life. Okay, like I said, I got my son born, and so I'd like to do the other half. That's one of my major goals right now, and to at least get my daughter in the book.
So who's it for? Who's your audience? Is it for your family? Is it for your kids?
No, this I would say would be for a wider audience, for people who are interested in, women in the military and women in aviation. And I would also say, women in the Army, because, the Army is different from the other services. More grunge kind of stuff, and not all of them, not the Marine Corps, but I was in a writers group for a long time. I'm not an organization joiner, but I did join a writers group. And that was one of your other questions, how did I hone my writing? I went to this writers group in the beginning, and I thought, oh, these other people, they're publishing their own books, and they're doing poems, and they're writing, they're writing. I didn't have a high opinion in the beginning. Okay. Because I thought I was going to get my book, Hawthorne's Cottage, it was going to be a Maeve Binchy like bestseller. Okay.
Yeah.
And I was very snobbish at the time about I would not publish my own book. And I spent so many years sending, query letters, proposals, manuscripts to literary agents and publishers. And boy, that is so exhausting and so tiring. And my husband had always said, that he would pay to have it published. And so, our money, we don't do his and hers. It's our money. But anyway, I appreciated that support, And so eventually I did that. And the only thing I did pay for a printing company to print the book. And that was costly. And I got 750 copies. I think it cost like $6,000, something like that. But I'm very pleased with it. And people who like that book won't necessarily like The Elimination Game, because The Elimination Game is a military thriller. And this other one is more like a beach read, where it's set in England. It's a tiny little village outside of London where grandmother, mother, and daughter, it's their main stories. And the small village where secrets are revealed and people feel betrayed. And it's, is love going to get them back together or not? That's basically that book.
Well, so I see some similarities, obviously, with intrigue and mystery going on, and in the Elimination Game that are similar to that. So, for the Elimination Game, did you have any reservations or concerns about backlash from your Army peers?
No.
Did you? No, you were like, I'm going to tell this story. I don't care what anybody thinks about it. You were good to go.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I've always maintained about both of my books here is if I go into Barnes and Noble and Borders, I know that, I would say I think the Elimination Game is like a B+ or A- is the grade I give it. Okay. It's better than most books, that you might find in Barnes and Noble or Borders. So I'm proud of it. But, I'm not going to, I don't think so highly of it that I would say, oh my God, Oprah has to put this in her book club. No, it's not stellar like that. Okay. It's a good read. It's a good read. And I think it's very interesting. And then Hawthorne's Cottage, the same thing. I would give this like maybe a B+. And I had a lot of people vet this book for me. I didn't do that so much with the Elimination Game because I had my friend Brad Lupine, and I go over the manuscripts ad infinitum. I mean, I do it until I literally cannot find another typo or incorrect something or other. The only thing that I was concerned about the Elimination Game is getting something, saying something that would not be believable or that was incorrect.
Yeah.
That about helicopters or Army aviation or something like that. So, like even when I had the one crash in the Adirondacks, in the trees, and it's like, okay, so how would that work? And that's how I went through the process. I would say, so if this happened and these people are here and I kind of know, what this guy is like and this guy's like this person. So what are the likely consequences that could happen? And then you go, and then I would kind of feel like if I were to say, oh, they all died, I go, oh, well, no, because they all died in the first one. So we don't want to do that again or whatever. Actually, see, I can't even remember now. Did they all die in the third one? I can't remember.
No, you're the last crash they survive. Yeah.
So no, I wasn't as once I was confident that everything in here was plausible or as correct technically as it could be. No, it didn't concern me about anybody at all.
Good for you. That's awesome.
Mainly what I wanted was just for people, if they wanted to read it, was to decide if, they liked the book. Yeah. And that's all I really cared about.
So Connie, you have this, career in the Army as an aviator, and you went on to do other things. What advice do you have for any young women who are thinking of joining the Army or who are just starting out their careers?
Well, I think that probably the most, I think this maybe doesn't even sound right to say, but I guess I feel like it's important not to distinguish yourself and think that you are so special as different from the men because you're a woman. I mean, you're peers. And so that's the important thing, your team, especially in the Army, and I can say that in my Army days, there were journalists who would come to the airfield and they wanted to interview women pilots, and the men did not like that. So I never let myself be interviewed.
Right.
And, I could say maybe now I might have regretted it, but that's who I was at the time. I was just Captain Reeves. I wasn't Captain Reeves, female pilot. And another thing that I would say that's almost like the opposite of that is to network with other women, those who have gone before and those who are coming after, like, tons of people do today and have done for a while, because in my era, it was, you do not want to draw attention to the fact that you're female, and you certainly don't want to be, grouping up with any other women. Not that there were many to group up with, but and I was the same as you. I didn't start doing any of that kind of networking until after I retired from the Army. I mean, for one thing, you don't have time, especially if you're a mother, you know, and you're on active duty. You don't have time for all those other things because you're raising your kids and you're moving every couple of years, you know, going to military schools and stuff like that. And so, yes, I think that networking is really, really important. And
well, that's great advice. And just a slight correction to that. I actually did start on active duty. It took me those many years of my own experiences in isolation and realizing how dumb it was that we weren't networking, putting that mom book together, and then getting into a position at officer personnel management where I was able to facilitate women getting together
yes,
by
that
getting
is
funding from Coast Guard headquarters to send more of us to Women in Aviation International and setting up formal networking events there. So yeah, like the women before me, like you, wanted nothing to do with it. So as a result, I didn't get a lot of mentoring from them unless I went and actively sought it. And like I told you earlier, when I was a junior officer, I wasn't going to go to a senior female and ask
oh
her
my
for
goodness,
advice.
no,
Never.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I was able to create those environments and see the value of that. And yeah, I was going to ask you about that first comment that you said about like, you know, you just be part of the team, you know, don't try and highlight the fact that you're unique because you're a woman. But I was going to ask you if there was room for those women to still put themselves in a place where they can be role models for younger people. And I feel like with the networking, they can do that.
And I think that that's true. And I'll tell you how I did it my entire Army career was, first of all, I'm not a profane person. I don't curse. Okay. And I started out, okay, wait, let me say this one little story first. Okay. I was the XO with an office here, hallway, company commander over here, first sergeant right here. The company commander and the first sergeant would yell from their desks to the orderly room, you know, with the clerks and say, Private so-and-so, come here. So I thought this was my first time in a unit because I've been in Washington, D.C. at Defense Intelligence Agency for a couple of years. Then I went to flight school. I come to this unit. Within 2 weeks, I'm promoted to captain. I don't know what a GP medium tent is. I don't know what a motor pool is. I don't know what any of that stuff is. Okay. And so I'm also thinking, okay, I guess this is how you do it. You yell down the hallway. And I'm telling my husband, he says, most people don't yell like that. I said, really? Because that wasn't my personality. So then I started getting up, you know, going to the orderly room and saying, Specialist so-and-so, I would appreciate it if you would, or Private this, could you please? So that was kind of how I operated. And then I did not tolerate profanity. I just didn't. And in the pilot's lounge, where we had to go every morning for briefing at 7 a.m., they had pinups and stuff and Playboys and stuff on there. I was the XO and I walked in one day. I mean, it wasn't too long after I got there because that was just, it's unprofessional. We weren't even really thinking then about sexual harassment things. It's totally unprofessional, you know? So I went in and I just threw all those things away and I took them all off the walls. And some of the guys say, you can't do that. I said, watch me. Yes, I can. You know, we don't need that stuff here. And the way I always phrased it, whether it was civilians or military, because they would say, like in a new unit, they would say, oh, we'll have you cursing like us in no time. I said, no, you won't. What I suggest that you do is you use the language that you would want your daughter to hear or your mother or your wife. And then I learned that Colin Powell and George Washington both had these kinds of sets of values. So I think another thing that I would say to a young person, a young woman, is you do not have to be like the men. You do not have to tell nasty jokes and laugh at the jokes. And, you know, I mean, that first unit that I was in, there was some nasty stuff going on there. You don't have to engage in that. You may not be accepted. I mean, as a commissioned officer in a unit with a lot of warrant officers, my job was not my goal was not to be accepted by them, but to be in a position that, whatever it is I needed them to do, that it would be done. And another thing I totally refused to do, my father taught me this. He was a chief master sergeant in the Air Force, and the last person I saw before I went off to the Army, and he said, I'll just give you a piece of advice about senior NCOs. And I said, oh, listen to them, right? Take their advice. He said, no, some of them are good, but some are not. You got to be careful, And, so I also learned from him not to fraternize with women enlisted, because I said, what if I'm like the only female officer and they're the only female enlisted? And he says, you can't do it. And so I did incorporate those things to keep the distance. And
you can mentor them. Mentoring them is different than fraternizing with them.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And one of the other things was that I never called enlisted people by the first name because I didn't want to give any of them the idea that it was, and the warrant officers, it's really more I was concerned about the warrant officers doing this, calling me by my first name. Because we went on a social event in this company on the Rhine River. Oh my gosh, you wouldn't believe how drunk every person was, company commander included. And my husband and I were there, and I don't mean me. My husband and I are sitting there just shell shocked at what's going on. Okay, and there was a warrant officer. He said to me on the boat, he says, so what are we supposed to call you? I said, Captain Reeves. And so I got the reputation of being, a bit uptight. That's fine. You just call me Captain Reeves and we're good.
Yeah.
Okay? Oh, this trip. I mean, people brought alcohol on the bus. Then we stopped at Officers Club in Heidelberg, I think, or something. Got more alcohol. Got on the boat. Practically everybody's drunk. And then on the bus on the way home, the operation officer's wife is standing up screaming, wow, Major Marubio's wife is having sex with so-and-so, so why can't I? And then there are a couple women taking their shirts off, they're being topless.
Oh, well, that sounds like a party.
Oh my gosh. And then
not one you'd want to be at as a female officer.
No. And amazingly, at the pilot's briefing the next work day, the company commander called me up there, and I think another new captain, and said that he just wanted to apologize for everything that had gone on. But he set those standards. Okay.
Yeah.
He had the crew chiefs will come to his house and work on his car, and there was just so much fraternization going on there.
Well, yeah, set your boundaries definitely as a leader. That's really good advice.
Yeah.
So what about for writers? Do you have any advice for women in aviation who aspire to write?
I think the first thing is it's hard to do is you just start writing. You if it's a memoir, then you might want to come up with your chapters or your synopses and then work from that. Or if it's a novel, I mean, first of all, every writer has their own style, and some people believe that you can only write a novel if, let's say, for example, you go to the town that you're going to set it in, and you're going to pick out the club, the bar, the houses, and put those in your book. Others believe it just kind of comes to you. I'm more of the process of it comes to you, and if I am going to put someone in a house, I'm just going to think of what that house might be. I don't need to go find a house to look like it. Okay. Yeah. But some authors do that. Elizabeth George is one. I don't know if you know who she is. She writes psychological thrillers. Okay. The Inspector Lynley series. Do you know that on PBS?
No.
Okay. So, it's Scotland Yard and London, and she's a She was my favorite author for a long time.
Okay.
So the important thing is just start writing. And, so many people are concerned about, well, what's the schedule? When should I do it? Should I do it before the kids get up at night? Whenever it's comfortable for you, what makes you comfortable. One thing is always end your day of writing with something you're going to write the next day, so that you don't catapult your way all the way to the end of where you go, oh, now I don't even know what's going to happen, or what can happen next, or you have to have something still.
This is like the third time I've heard this advice, and I don't know who. I mean, I think somebody quoted Hemingway as saying it. I don't know who it was, but this is the third time I've heard this advice in like the past week. So I feel like the universe is telling me something, because I'm due to get back into my manuscript, and I think I was doing the thing where I would get to like a finishing point, and so I would have to get the momentum to get started the next day. Whereas I like this idea of like stop right before you're out of ideas.
I will tell you that it also ends up bringing you those cliffhanger chapters.
There you go.
So it's a cliffhanger for the reader, and then it's you've got to pick up somewhere. The next time you sit down to write.
I love it.
So writing is. I actually found writing to be very fun. I didn't find it like onerous or difficult, but the English language is truly my biggest forte. Okay. Even though I may love other things, I'm not as good at them as I am at the English language, the grammar, the proofreading. And I would say there are like four ranges with the book: the writing, the proofing and editing and revising, the publishing, and the promoting.
Yes, ma'am.
The writing, the writing I know for a lot of people is hard, but the others are even harder. Okay.
Yeah.
I wrote Hawthorne's Cottage in a matter of a couple months. Okay.
Wow.
But I spent a couple years revising, changing chapters around, changing names. And there are also things that a writer might be resistant to. Like in that Hawthorne's Cottage that I sent out to like 40 people to read, 20 of whom I did not know. Several of them came back and said, too many characters start with the name of A. And I thought, well, that's too bad. But eventually I changed it because I thought they were right. There was Amanda and there was this and there was that. So I changed the names. Okay. So the proofing, editing, and revising, if someone can get other people to go through that, that's absolutely needed, because no one can put out 300 or 400 pages without error. Even if you're, a top notch with the English language, you can't do it because you miss things. And so I would suggest that someone, if they do it on their computer, of course they do spell check and autocorrect, all those things, but then you print it out. You print out the manuscript so you see it with a different view. And then it's also helpful if you actually read it aloud to yourself.
Yes.
Because if you read it aloud to yourself, then you can see where, that spelling is wrong, even though, spell check told me that was it.
Right.
Then the publishing. One has to decide, why does one want their book published?
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, having been a publisher now, that most authors are not completely honest about that. Okay. Most will say, I just want to tell the story, or if it's a memoir, I just want it for my family. But boy, I found that the people whose books I published, all wanted their book to go further, to be, it might not necessarily expect it to be a bestseller, but I think that's everyone's secret wish for it to be a bestseller. Yeah. So hard. It's like winning the lottery. And I eventually learned that, unless you know someone in the business who can do you a favor, or unless you have something that is so unique, so different to what the literary agents or publishers have seen, then yours is not likely to make it to that point, because a lot of that, unfortunately, today is based on who you know, and they like the big names, like Michael Crichton and Dan Brown, and so the publishing is difficult, and one has to decide if they're going to keep trying for a mainstream publisher or publish it themselves. And I tell you, like, this cost me like $3 to print from Amazon. My husband's cost like $5 a copy. Now, when Linda Maloney and I did her finished book, it's like $25 a copy.
Yeah, it was a little bit more.
Yeah. So the publishing, if you do it yourself, it's very difficult. I mean, I decided to form a publishing company, and then I did not intend at that point. I only formed it to help myself. To get my own ISBN, and you learn so much doing all of that with all the bureaucracy that's involved.
Yeah.
But then I found I wanted to publish first another person's book. Her name is Helen Carson. Mm-hmm. She had written a book called The Kapellmeister's Daughter, and I desperately wanted to read her manuscript. And she was in the writer's group, and I finally got to read it. And once I read it, I said, "Oh my, this is just such an amazing story." It was about her grandfather and grandmother, who I think lived in Austria. And the grandfather had been a Kapellmeister, or quite like a band director. And they had lived around the world, Egypt and Singapore and India. And then I think it was before World War II began. I'm pretty sure that World War II is the big war that was in this book. And romance and stuff. It was really, really good. And so I published hers, and you should have seen how proud she was to be 85 years old and publish her book that was her legacy to her grandparents. And it was just fantastic. Yeah. So, but I did also learn that it's working with other people to publish their book. You try to tamp down some expectations, but it's hard to do. And with the Kapellmeister's Daughter, I would have Helen Carson's daughter calling me every now and then saying, I want to be sure to be able to get copies of this book after my mother dies. I mean, it's with the vision that it's part of the estate, basically, which it is, but we still have unsold copies. So, you try to get it into the top tiers, but it's extremely difficult. That's a full-time job in itself. And so the promoting is actually, I think, the hardest thing of all, because then that involves, cold calling and going places, spending your money and sending things out into the ether, and you have no idea if something's going to come back.
And also now there are other venues. There's a lot of social media and podcast interviews and things like that can project your story out there. So, well, Connie, this has been a pleasure. It's been so great to talk to you after all these years of sort of circling around each other. And we appreciate your book. It's very entertaining. We're enjoying discussing it. We have one more discussion on the last Sunday of this month at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you're available, you're welcome to join us. But thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. Please join us in the Aviatrix Book Club when we celebrate our airline cabin crew with the book, The Great Stewardess Rebellion, How Women Launched a Workplace Revolution at 30,000 Feet by Nell McShane Wolfhart. Be sure to check out the Literary Aviatrix website. I want to thank Michael Wilds and Shasta Ways of the Women's Soar Group for helping me build my dream in this beautiful new website, and for all of their help in producing my interviews over the past couple of years. Blue skies and happy reading.